Justice for Nicolás Maduro and his wife Cilia. Dressed in matching tan prison uniforms, they're led in handcuffs from a chopper, headed to their first court appearance, surrounded by heavily armed federal agents.
We can't take a chance that somebody else takes over Venezuela that doesn't have the good of the Venezuelan people in mind.
Maduro's dramatic capture and transfer. Shockwaves ran around the world when Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro, long a polarizing figure on the international stage, was captured and taken into United States custody in early January 2026. In what U.S. officials described as a carefully planned operation, military forces and federal law enforcement executed a mission in Caracas that ended with Maduro and his wife, Cilia Flores, detained and transported to the United States to face federal criminal charges. The operation, codenamed and reportedly involving coordination between U.S. Special Operations and intelligence units, was described as rapid and highly secured, with armored vehicles, aircraft, and agents working in coordination to ensure no escape. The news broke in the pre-dawn hours, leaving much of the world stunned at the sight of a sitting head of state removed from power and transferred to another country to face trial, an extraordinary and historically rare event outside of war or regime overthrow. According to official accounts confirmed in multiple reports, U.S. forces conducted a strike that overcame defenses at locations associated with Maduro, ultimately securing him and Flores and bringing them onto U.S. soil. They were initially flown to a military air base in New York State before arriving in Manhattan to appear before a federal court. The scene was described by journalists as surreal. The once firm leader of Venezuela, known for his defiance against U.S. policy, now in chains and surrounded by federal agents. While U.S. officials hailed the capture as a triumph of justice, critics around the world denounced it as an act of aggression and a violation of international norms. Beyond drug trafficking, indictments list allegations of conspiracy to use and possess machine guns and destructive devices in furtherance of narcotics offenses, which carry substantial mandatory minimum sentences. Prosecutors argue that Maduro's influence extended to orchestrating drug movements and corruption that contributed to violence and instability, both inside Venezuela and across the Western Hemisphere. Though the legal battle will surely be long and contested, these charges represent the culmination of years of investigations that U.S. law enforcement officials describe as among the most complex in the Southern District of New York's history. Maduro's defiant defense. Throughout the initial proceedings, Maduro has rejected the authority of the U.S. court over his fate. In statements made in the courtroom, he insisted that he remains the legitimate president of Venezuela and characterized his capture as an unlawful act. Maduro has repeatedly described himself as a prisoner of war and, according to reports, claims he was effectively kidnapped from his home in Caracas. His defense attorneys have argued that as the leader of a sovereign state, Maduro should benefit from international immunities that protect heads of state from prosecution in foreign courts. They have signaled plans to challenge the legality of his seizure and detention on both constitutional and international law grounds. Observers note that this defense strategy seeks not only to contest the charges, but also to reshape public perception. By framing his capture as illegitimate and unjust, Maduro aims to rally international support and question the legal grounds of the U.S. action. These assertions resonate in some corners of global opinion, particularly among nations wary of U.S. interventionism. Yet, in the eyes of U.S. prosecutors, these defenses do not mitigate the substance of the criminal charges they have brought forward. Not guilty pleas. Both Maduro and Flores stood before Judge Alvin Hellerstein during their arraignment and entered pleas of not guilty to all counts against them. Their responses were formal but resolute. Maduro, speaking through an interpreter, reiterated that he had done nothing deserving of prosecution and emphasized his position that he is Venezuela's rightful leader. Flores echoed similar sentiments, rejecting the narrative that she participated in any unlawful conduct. These pleas set the stage for a legal process that is expected to be protracted and deeply contentious. While the defense frames the case as a violation of sovereignty and diplomatic norms, Prosecutors stress that the indictments are based on detailed allegations of systematic criminal conduct. The dichotomy between these positions is likely to define the early months of pretrial motions, evidentiary hearings, and international appeals. Detention at MDC Brooklyn. Following their arraignment, Maduro and his wife were transferred to the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, one of the nation's most secure federal facilities. Reports from journalists and legal analysts describe the prison as notoriously tough, known for its strict security measures and harsh living conditions. The MDC houses high-profile detainees and individuals awaiting trial on serious federal offenses, making it a fitting but stark environment for a former head of state. Inside its walls, detainees face confined cells, constant lighting, and regimented routines designed to minimize risk and maintain control. Many defense attorneys and human rights advocates have criticized MDC conditions as dehumanizing, especially for prolonged pretrial detention. They argue that its environment can take a psychological toll, particularly on individuals unfamiliar with the U.S. prison system. Maduro's placement there serves as a dramatic contrast to his prior life of luxury and political authority, underscoring the gravity of the situation. Harsh prison conditions described. Former inmates and experts who have worked with detainees at MDC describe conditions that are often bleak and mentally taxing. Cells are small and secure, lighting never fully turned off, and inmates often report feelings of isolation and sensory overload. The combination of physical restrictions and psychological strain has contributed to its reputation as one of the most challenging detention centers in the federal system. For a global figure like Maduro, the transition from presidential palace to detention cell has captured public imagination and spotlighted questions about how justice is served. Even those who strongly oppose Maduro's policies have expressed concern about the optics of a foreign leader confined in a facility with such a harsh reputation. The conditions at MDC raise broader discussions about detainee treatment, pretrial detention rights, and how high-profile international cases intersect with domestic incarceration systems. Notable inmates comparison. MDC Brooklyn has housed a long roster of infamous inmates over the years, figures accused of terrorism, organized crime leaders, and corporate executives convicted of major fraud. Its halls have been filled with individuals whose names have dominated headlines, from convicted mobsters to controversial political figures. Maduro's addition to this list signals not only the seriousness of his charges, but also the symbolic transformation from head of state to federal detainee. These comparisons matter because they frame how the U.S. legal system treats individuals, regardless of political stature, when they are brought to trial under U.S. law. For legal scholars, Maduro's case becomes a touchstone for debates on equality before the law, a former leader now sharing institutional space with figures labeled threats to U.S. national security. Trump's comments on Venezuela's opposition. While the legal proceedings were underway, political commentary from U.S. leadership added another dimension to the story. President Donald Trump used public statements to temper expectations about support for Venezuela's opposition figures. In particular, he questioned the strength of opposition leader Maria Corina Machado, casting doubt on her ability to unite Venezuela's fractured political factions despite significant international recognition and domestic support. These remarks highlighted internal debates within American policy circles over how best to approach Venezuela's political transition and who should lead it. Trump's comments suggested a complex calculation: support for regime change on one hand, skepticism about the viability of certain opposition leaders on the other. This tension reveals deeper uncertainties about Venezuela's future, even as Maduro faces prosecution. Broader geopolitical undertones. The capture and trial of Nicolás Maduro carry implications beyond legal accountability. Analysts argue the event reflects broader geopolitical ambitions and disputes involving the U.S., Latin America, and global powers. Critics of the operation have pointed to historical debates over American interventionism, sovereignty, and international law, questioning whether the seizure of Maduro represents a dangerous precedent. In recent days, Figures like Russia's foreign minister have publicly condemned the operation as destabilizing to the global order, accusing the U.S. of undermining principles of sovereignty and international cooperation. These geopolitical undertones stretch beyond Venezuela's borders. They touch on U.S. influence in Latin America, relationships with China and Russia, and the broader competition for strategic resources like oil. As international actors weigh in, the Maduro case has become more than a legal matter. It is a flashpoint in the ongoing struggle over global governance, power, and national autonomy. In conclusion, the arrest, prosecution, and detention of Nicolás Maduro and his wife mark one of the most consequential episodes in recent international relations. A sitting head of state brought to U.S. soil to face serious criminal allegations, a courtroom that will decide their fate, and a world watching every move. This story is far from over. As the legal process unfolds and global responses continue to shape the narrative, the implications will resonate well beyond Manhattan courtrooms and detention cells. The search for justice, interpretation of international law, and future of Venezuela itself will all be shaped in the months and years ahead. For continued analysis and updates on this unfolding story, subscribe to stay informed.